Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Path to 1 Million. My name is Clip Deviate, and these are the stories that chronicle my journey to impact 1 million people. And I'm going to start off this Sunday morning by telling you that I love cheesecake. Now, I don't really care for the cheesecake like from the Cheesecake Factory, where they blend, seems like, every piece of sugar into their cheesecake as possible. Like, for instance, if they're doing like an Oreo cheesecake, or they do a caramel cheesecake, or a Snickers cheesecake, or a Snickerdoodles cheesecake, or anything else like that. Believe it or not, I'm like a very traditional guy. I just like a slice of cheesecake, and if I'm going to do anything on it, might have like some strawberries on it or some cherries or something like that. But that's really about it. I'm a very traditional guy when it comes to cheesecake. When I got into cooking, way back in the day, I decided that I was actually going to make my own cheesecake. The one thing I quickly discovered by doing my own cooking was the fact that I could actually cook better at home than what I could actually do when I ate out at restaurants. So the thing is, though, when it comes to baking, is that if you don't follow the recipe exactly, then it's always going to wind up bad. The thing is, like when you saute on the stove, or if you're making soup on the stove or whatever it is like that, you can actually tweak the recipe as you go. You can actually taste it and say, yeah, this needs a little bit more salt, or this needs a little bit more pepper, or it needs a little bit more, wine, or whatever it is. But when you're baking, you put all the ingredients into a pot, you throw it in there. It's a very stringent process that you have to follow. And once you put it in that oven, you are committed. And if you pull it out and it tastes bad, there's really not a lot you can do. I mean, if you're trying to make a cake and you forget to add, let's say butter or something to it, and you pull it out and it's like, oh, that's nasty. It's not like you could drop ketchup on it. You can't melt butter and pour it onto the cake and expect it to taste better. Well, I don't know. Maybe you could. I don't know. I'm not a master chef, but this is just my experience when it comes to baking. Anyways, so I spent probably about a good year and a half working on trying to create what I considered to be the perfect cheesecake. And I would make these cheesecakes. I would give them to my friends. I would watch their reaction. I would taste it myself. And how did this one turn out? How did that one turn out? And I was getting comments along the way like, oh, this is pretty good. This is pretty good. But I didn't want pretty good. I wanted awesome. I wanted phenomenal. So I experimented, and I realized very quickly that if I scaled back on the sugar and added more alcohol, that added a nice sweet flavor without having all the calories involved, and it actually improved the taste. Anyways, I finally got to a point with all of this experimenting. I finally got to a point where people were saying, wow, this is the best cheesecake ever, right? They would just rave and rave about how good it was, and like, man, can you make this again? And then when my friends would invite me over to dinner, they would actually specifically ask me. They would say, dude, can you make some of that cheesecake, right? So that's when I knew that I had the absolute killer recipe. But it wasn't just the recipe, though. It was the actual process in making it, because when you make cheesecake, one of the things that, the curse of the cheesecake is that when you bring the cheesecake out of the oven, one of the things it wants to do is it wants to crack, and it winds up looking like the Grand Canyon. And I figured out a way to get around that. And I had this whole mental process. And every time I would do it, I would just kind of like go into my happy space, and I would just go and make the cheesecake, right? Throw all the ingredients into a pot. And I just knew what to do when and where. And I would set alarms throughout at that time, throughout my apartment, that would go off, and I knew exactly what to do and when to add, more water, when to change the temperature on the stove, when to pull the cheesecake out, how long should I let it set? I mean, I had the whole thing down to a science. And then I stopped cooking. It was a very dumb decision on my part. At the time, I thought I was doing the right thing. I'm not going to go into details about it. I will spare you about it. But anyways, I stayed out of the kitchen, and I was out of the kitchen for a number of years. When I got back into the kitchen about a year and a half to 2 years ago, and I rediscovered my love for cooking, I remembered to myself, I'm like, yeah, I used to make really killer cheesecake. So I had a friend's party that was coming up, and I thought to myself, what a great way to break the fast is I'm going to make a cheesecake, and I'm going to take it to them, because I hadn't made one in forever. And so I found the recipe that I used inside of Evernote, and I was looking at the recipe, and all of a sudden it occurred to me that I never wrote down the process, right, of how to make the cheesecake. All I had was like the recipe, and I was like, add this, add this, add that. That was basically it. The recipe that I had created and fine-tuned over those years, but also the process as well of how to make it. So I tried to remember what it was, and I wrote down some steps, and I'm like, oh, I remember this, but I couldn't remember the timing that I used, and all these other things. And I was like, well, I'm just going to give it a whirl. So I threw the ingredients together. I tried to remember. I really did try to remember how to make this. And I made it. And of course, I pulled it out, and the cheesecake was cracked like crazy. There were parts of it that were undercooked. There was parts of it that were too cooked. And of course, the party is here. So I'm like, well, it's cheesecake. Maybe we can bury it in fruit or something else like that, and maybe nobody will notice. So I take it to the party, and we get there, and we cut it up, and I'm apologizing profusely. I'm really sorry this looks so bad and stuff, da 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 da. And of course, everybody there was like, oh, well, cheesecake cracks all the time. And I'm thinking to myself, well, my cheesecake does not crack. And they ate it, and everybody's like, yeah, this is really good. And I'm thinking to myself, that's not what I'm looking for, but it is what it is. And so now for me to figure out what this is again, I'm going to have to kind of like go back and kind of like start reinventing the wheel. But this is what happens when you don't follow that process, right? First off, the failure on my part was documenting the process, obviously. But the second part was actually following the process. Because once I had developed that process and I had followed that process, then the cheesecakes always came out the same, right? It was consistently good. Consistently, friends were telling me that this was the best cheesecake they ever had. And I love that reaction. When you got friends that can't even talk because the food is giving them a foodgasm in their mouth, that's exactly what you want, especially when you're cooking. And this applies to any number of industries out there, right? As far as being absolutely consistent. And the one thing that I was reading about actually about a week ago when talking about following process is there's a pharmaceutical company that's out there that's called Baxter International. They make a drug that's called Hairpin. Now, if you have ever watched House, if you ever watched ER, if you ever watched any of these medical shows that are out there and they're throwing around these terms and taking care of their patients or whatever it is, they have all mentioned the term hairpin at some point, because as soon as I read it, I knew exactly what the drug was. And this particular drug is used when people are going in for bypass surgery, something that Americans seem to do in mass quantities. And so they use this hairpin as an anticoagulant in there so they can actually go in, do the surgery, do the bypass, and then, afterwards the patient heals. What they discovered was that after the surgeries were getting done, all of a sudden, after years of not having any problems, the patients started getting sick afterwards. They were getting infections. They were, getting violently ill. And of course, after bypass surgery, this is not what you want. So when they finally did an investigation and they had to go back all the way to the source, come to find out the Chinese company that was making the key ingredients for the hairpin drug, the ingredients were contaminated. So there was a failure on two parts. Is number one, the FDA wasn't doing their proper inspection of the ingredients as they were coming into the United States. And the second thing was Baxter International didn't do their inspection as well, because they had so many years of success and they didn't have any problems whatsoever. This is when they started to cut back on their process. So they're thinking that if we cut back on the process, if we don't follow the process, then we should get the same results. And that's not what happened. And people started getting sick. And of course, because we live in a litigious society, lawsuits are flowing like crazy against Baxter International. And as far as the FDA goes, I don't know what their fate is. But anyways, that was just something that I read the other day that I thought, was really interesting. When you don't follow the process, you're not going to get the results you're looking for. This is something I experienced myself this last Friday with working with my client, and they are actually using my LinkedIn product. We saw when we first ran it for the first month, we actually saw really good results from it. Just to kind of give you a scale of what I'm talking about here, during that first month, using LinkedIn, we were able to create 400 connections with their dream ideal clients. And then when we contacted those 400 dream clients using LinkedIn as the first point, we got 60 people to actually write us back when we contacted them and asked them about making the appointment. Now, people always tell you with sales, it's a numbers game, and I absolutely hate that, but I have to tell you the numbers so you can kind of appreciate what it is that the direction that I'm going here. So we contact 400 people, 60 of them actually took the time to write us back, which is huge. This is a phenomenally great number. Now, a good majority of them said, no, we're not interested, but thank you, which is fine. Not everybody's going to say yes, but there was a certain percentage that asked for more information, which we provided to them, and still having conversation with them, and a certain percentage of them actually said yes. Now, everybody inside the company was excited about this because they didn't have any kind of a lead generation process in place before whatsoever. It was just, hey, if we happen to bump into somebody at a party or a convention or something, then, this is what we'll do. But when they brought me on board, they now had a systemized process to bring leads into their company. Well, their executive team, in a briefing on this, and they were taking a look at all the numbers, the executive team said, well, you're moving too slow. You need to move a lot faster. So what we're going to do is we're just going to email this list of 30,000 people that we have. So when the president broke it down to me and said, this is what we're going to do, I told him point blank, I said, well, the only reason why we're seeing this success is because we're using LinkedIn as a spot to connect with these people. If you cut the LinkedIn out of the process, you're not going to have that opportunity to really warm those leads up before you reach out to them afterwards. And I said, I don't think you should do this. And he goes, well, this is what the executive team wants. They just want to cold email all these people. And I said, you do realize you just said cold email, right? So you're not going to see the same results. He said, yes, Cliff, this is just something we are going to have to do. So this is not my wheelhouse. This is not my area of expertise. I focus on building relationships. I am not an email campaign guy whatsoever. I did offer to help them out if I could. So that's what we were actually focusing on Friday. So now if you think about it, their results was that if we take, if we contacted 400 people before and we got 60 of them to take the time to write us back, then we should be able to contact 4,000 of them and get 600 of them to write us back. But that's not how the numbers turned out. What happened is that we sent out the first email blast, and there was like 4,000 people on that email. One person wrote back and said no, just one. And so when we saw those results, of course, the president of the company was all excited because he's like, wow, look how many people opened up the email. Look how many people read the email. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many people opened your email. It doesn't matter how many people looked at your email. What matters is how many people actually said, yes, I want to talk to you about purchasing your product. That's what's most important is sales. But they skipped the entire first part of the process. They didn't follow the process thinking that they were going to get the same result. So now over the weekend, of course, there's a flurry of emails that are going around. And, their response to this is that, well, the reason why it didn't work is because you didn't send out 30,000 emails. So their thinking on this is that, well, if we did, 4,000 and got one, then we should do 30,000 and then we'll get maybe 1,800. I don't know what they're thinking. But, like I said, I supported their vision, but now I have to write a report and talk about this inside of this process. And if there's one thing that I've learned, especially when it comes with, with doing this, is that, if you don't follow the process, if you don't follow all the steps that are involved, you're not going to consistently get the same results. And don't get me wrong, I am all for the fact that sometimes you just need to experiment a little bit to try to tweak and improve the process. But when you cut the process in half and expect the same results, that's just not how it happens. Anyways, I know that's a lot to lay on you on a Sunday morning. Probably most of you are, just gearing up to have coffee and rolling out of bed after your wild night last night. Anyways, just wanted to chat with you for a little bit and tell you another story and where we're going. So anyways, I will be back tomorrow, mañana, with another tale. I hope you guys have a fantastic Sunday, and I will see you then.